Today, we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one in particular is heartbreaking, where a woman's desperate rescue attempt to save her trapped puppies turned into a nightmare when she became wedged in the narrow pit herself. The second one is even more frightening, as the explorers were entrapped in a confined space with an enraged 6-foot-long poisonous snake. As always, viewer discretion is advised. April 24th, 2001 was the day when one of the most heartbreaking tragedies took place. 47-year-old Margaret Chen thought it would be just another peaceful evening walk with her two golden retriever puppies on the big island of Hawaii. She had moved to the island 3 years earlier, drawn by the stunning volcanic landscape and the promise of a quieter life. The puppies, Max and Luna, were barely 6 months old, energetic bundles of fur who brought joy to her days and helped fill the loneliness that had followed her divorce. Margaret had walked this path dozens of times over the past year. The area was riddled with lava tubes. Underground tunnels formed when molten rock had flowed beneath the surface centuries ago. Most of the openings were small and obvious, easy to spot and avoid. The Park Service had warned residents about them, but Margaret had always been careful. The puppies were particularly playful that evening. They chased each other in circles, wrestled on the smooth lava rock, and explored every interesting scent they encountered. Margaret smiled as she watched them, remembering why she had gotten them in the first place. After 23 years of marriage had ended in heartbreak, these two little lives had given her purpose again. As they reached the halfway point of their usual route, the puppies suddenly bolted. There was no warning, no obvious trigger. One moment they were walking calmly beside her, the next they were racing away across the lava field. Margaret called after them, confused by their sudden burst of energy. But they were already disappearing behind a ridge of volcanic rock. She wasn't worried at first. The puppies often wandered off for a few minutes before returning, tongues hanging out and tails wagging. But as she followed their path, calling their names, a strange disorientation crept over her. The familiar landscape looked different in the fading light. Minutes turned into an hour. Margaret's casual calling became more urgent. She climbed over rock formations she had never explored before, searching every crevice and shadow. The puppies' golden fur should have been easy to spot, but there was no sign of them anywhere. As darkness began to fall, real fear crept into her heart. The lava field was dangerous at night. Sharp rocks, hidden crevices, and those treacherous lava tube openings made navigation deadly without proper light. She had only a small flashlight, meant for emergencies, not for a major search operation. Margaret's voice grew hoarse from calling. She had covered nearly a mile in every direction from where she last saw them. The beam of her flashlight seemed pathetically small against the vast expanse of black rock. Every shadow looked like a puppy. Every rock formation seemed to hide a possible answer. Then she heard it. Faint whimpering, so soft she almost missed it. She stopped walking and listened with every fiber of her being. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of a puppy in distress. The sound seemed to be coming from below, somewhere beneath her feet. Margaret followed the sound, moving carefully across the uneven surface. The whimpering grew slightly louder, leading her to a section of the lava field she had never explored before. Here, there were holes and pits with rock formations that were different, more broken and irregular. The crying was definitely coming from one of these openings. Margaret moved from hole to hole, calling down into the darkness. Most were shallow, just dips in the rock surface. But one was different. When she called into it, her voice echoed back strangely, suggesting a much deeper cavity. She aimed her flashlight down into the opening. The beam disappeared into what looked like a narrow tunnel, and there, about 15 feet down, roughly 4.5 meters, she could see two small golden shapes huddled together on a ledge. Max and Luna were alive, but they were trapped. The lava tube opening was only about 2 feet wide, just 23 inches across. Too narrow for Margaret to fit through, but somehow the puppies had managed to fall in. They must have been exploring when the ground gave way beneath them. Now they were stuck on the bottom of a narrow pit, scared and unable to climb back up the smooth walls. Margaret's heart broke as she looked down at them. Luna, the smaller of the two, appeared to be limping. Max was pressed against her, both of them huddling together. She tried everything she could think of. She called 911, but her cell phone had no signal in this remote area. She tried lowering her belt down to them, but it wasn't nearly long enough. She even attempted to climb down herself, but the opening was too narrow and the walls too smooth. The puppies' cries grew weaker as the night wore on. They were getting tired, probably thirsty, and definitely scared. Margaret refused to leave them. She lay on her stomach next to the opening, talking to them in soothing tones, trying to keep them calm while she figured out what to do. Dawn was still hours away. Help was miles away. The puppies needed her now. Margaret made a decision that would cost her everything. She remembered seeing a longer piece of rope in her garage. If she could somehow get closer to the opening, maybe she could lower it down far enough for the puppies to grab onto. The walls of the lava tube were smooth, but there might be enough texture for her to find handholds. She positioned herself over the opening, feet first, and began to lower herself down. At first it seemed like it might work, but the walls were smoother than they looked, and the opening was narrower than she had estimated. Margaret slipped. In an instant, she was falling headfirst into the lava tube. The narrow opening that had trapped her puppies now trapped her as well. But unlike the puppies, who had landed on a ledge, Margaret became wedged in the tube itself, her body stuck upside down. The irony was heartbreaking. She was now close enough to touch her puppies, but she couldn't help them. She couldn't help herself. Her waist and entire upper body were pinned by the narrow walls. Hours passed. Margaret's calls for help grew weaker. She was desperate, but was close enough to pet her puppies. She struggled to move, but somehow was glad that she was near them. The puppies, sensing their human's distress, whimpered softly. They were all trapped now, all of them victims of love and desperation. Luckily, a few hikers were passing nearby, and they found them the next morning and called for help. Margaret was barely conscious. The fire department arrived quickly, but what they found was devastating. Margaret was wedged upside down in the narrow tube, her face flushed dark red from the blood pooling in her head. She could barely speak, her voice a whisper. Through cracked lips, she managed to tell them what happened, how she heard the puppies crying, how she tried to reach them, how she slipped and became trapped. Her words came in fragments, exhausted and drained from the ordeal. The rescue workers immediately began trying to extract her, but the narrow opening made it nearly impossible. Every minute that passed made her condition worse. Being trapped upside down was slowly killing her. The blood pooling in her head was putting enormous pressure on her brain and heart. Hours passed as they worked desperately to free her. They brought in specialized equipment, consulted with experts, and tried every technique they knew. But Margaret's body was shutting down. The sustained pressure on her cardiovascular system was too much. Her heart, already stressed from hours of fighting gravity, began to fail. Luna's eyes stared at her, filled with confusion and fear. The puppy's soft whimpers cut deeper than Margaret's physical pain. The medical team on scene could see the signs. Her pulse was becoming irregular. Her blood pressure was dropping. The lack of proper circulation was causing organ failure. Even if they could extract her immediately, the damage might already be irreversible. Her puppies could only watch. They saw Margaret up close, suffering, fighting to survive. But she just kept a brave face, smiling and petting them with every little strength she could muster. Margaret's fingers reached their fur. She stroked them gently, knowing these might be her last touches. She knew she wouldn't make it, so she kept on saying, "Take care of my dogs." Margaret's breathing grew shallower. Her heart was working overtime, trying to pump blood upward against gravity, but it was a battle it couldn't win. As the hours dragged on, cardiac arrest became inevitable. Margaret touched their noses one last time, feeling their breath against her fingertips. Somehow, she knew they understood this was goodbye. The rescue workers never stopped trying. But sometimes, even the most heroic efforts aren't enough. Margaret's body simply couldn't survive the prolonged trauma of being trapped upside down. April 24th, 2001. A woman who had given her heart to 2 small puppies gave her life trying to save them. The rescue workers eventually managed to retrieve her body and the 2 puppies, Max and Luna, who survived their ordeal with minor injuries. They were taken to the local animal shelter, where they waited for new homes. The lava tube is still there, now marked with warning signs. The area around it has been fenced off to prevent other tragedies. Margaret Chen's final act was one of pure love. She couldn't save herself, but her sacrifice meant that Max and Luna lived to bring joy to another family. She's watching over them, proud of how far they've come. Her puppies did eventually find another family, and they were loved. In the end, perhaps that's what she would have wanted, for her puppies to be safe, even if she couldn't be there to see them grow up. This next story will make your blood run cold. You're trapped in a cramped claustrophobic space with 3 others, facing an enraged, 6-foot-long snake hissing to attack, and then suddenly your only light source goes out. It was January 4th, 1989, when 3 experienced spelunkers walked into what should have been a routine scouting mission in Mexico. Cynthia Van, Ray Hardcastle, and John Pint were exploring Cueva de la Venta, a massive lava tube near Tequila Volcano. Cueva de la Venta stretched before them like a giant's tunnel, carved by ancient lava flows that had cooled and hardened thousands of years ago. The cave was famous among local spelunkers for its 75 entrances, each one perfectly spaced along the tube's length like windows in a subway tunnel. These natural skylights had earned the cave its nickname among locals, the Gallery of Light. It seemed like the perfect place for a quick look around. They traveled light that day, just one 6-volt flashlight and a small disposable light that was almost dead. Since most of the cave was naturally lit, they figured they wouldn't need much equipment. The first part of their journey was beautiful. Sunlight streamed through the entrances, creating these amazing light patterns on the smooth lava walls. They moved through this bright corridor easily, examining rock formations. The temperature inside the cave remained pleasantly cool, a welcome relief from the building heat outside. The smooth floor made walking easy, though they remained cautious of loose rocks and sudden changes in elevation. As they progressed deeper into the cave system, things started to change. The entrances became fewer and farther apart. The natural light began to fade. Eventually, they reached a section where the wide tunnel suddenly narrowed into a dark canyon. At floor level, the passage was only about a foot wide, barely 30 centimeters. Above their heads, it opened up to about 5 feet across, roughly 1.5 meters. The cheerful sunlight was completely gone here. Their world shrunk down to whatever their single flashlight could show them. Cynthia switched it on, and the beam cut through the darkness ahead. They squeezed into the narrow passage, moving sideways in single file. The walls pressed against their bodies. Every sound seemed amplified in the confined space. The darkness beyond their small circle of light felt heavy and endless. They kept moving deeper into the mountain. The passage seemed to go on much longer than expected. The walls stayed narrow at the bottom, forcing them to continue moving sideways. The temperature started to change too, becoming warmer and more humid. Then their flashlight began to dim. The battery was dying faster than they thought it would. The beam grew weaker with each step. They were deep inside the mountain now, far from the last entrance they had passed. The reality of their situation started to sink in. They had to keep moving forward. Standing still meant being trapped when the light died completely. The 6-volt flashlight flickered once, then it went out. Complete darkness swallowed them. The kind of darkness where you can't see your hand in front of your face. The kind that makes you feel like you're floating in empty space. They were now blind, trapped in a stone corridor with no way to see where they were going. John grabbed his nearly dead disposable flashlight. His hands were shaking as he found the switch. The weak beam came on, barely lighting up 3 feet ahead of them. That's when they saw it. Stretched across the narrow passage was a massive snake, 6 feet long, almost 2 meters, coiled up like a living roadblock. Its scales caught the dying light, and its head was raised, tongue flicking in and out, sensing the intruders. The snake had been sleeping in the warm passage when their footsteps woke it up. Now it was awake, alert, and blocking their only way forward. Cynthia accidentally stepped onto it, making it even more aggressive. The snake's eyes reflected the weak light as it stared at them. Its body was thick and powerful, muscles visible beneath the patterned scales. This was a predator in its own territory, and they were trespassing. They were initially shocked to encounter a snake. In years of caving, they usually don't come across such animals so deep inside a cave. Most people think lava tubes are empty, lifeless places. But Cueva de la Venta was different. Those 75 entrances that made the cave so beautiful also made it a perfect home for wildlife. The constant flow of air through the openings created a warm, humid environment that stayed the same temperature year-round. Small animals, bats, rodents, insects, even birds, regularly use these entrances as shelter from the harsh surface conditions. Where prey animals gather, predators follow. The steady warmth from the volcanic activity below, combined with the reliable food source above, made this cave system an ideal hunting ground for a large snake. The 6-foot serpent they encountered wasn't just passing through, it was a resident, an apex predator that had claimed this narrow section as its territory. It had probably been living in these tunnels for years, growing larger and more territorial with each successful hunt. The group had unknowingly entered its domain. Now, a low hiss filled the narrow space. The snake's mouth opened slightly and they could see its fangs. Its striking range was at least 2 feet, over half a meter. In that confined passage, there was nowhere to dodge. The disposable flashlight was getting dimmer. They could hear the snake moving, repositioning itself, its scales scraping against the stone. The creature seemed to sense their vulnerability. Then, their last light died. Absolute darkness returned. But now the silence was broken by the sound of the snake moving. They could hear it breathing, hissing softly, shifting its massive body across the floor. The creature was invisible, but very much there, blocking their escape. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The snake's presence filled that narrow space, and they knew one wrong step could trigger an attack. That's when Hardcastle made his decision. He started backing away slowly, feeling his way along the wall in complete darkness. If he could make it back to the last entrance, maybe he could find something to help. It was their only chance. Moving through that dark passage was terrifying. Every step had to be perfect. One stumble could make enough noise to alert the snake. The hissing grew fainter as he moved away, but he knew his friends were still trapped back there. When he finally reached daylight, he searched frantically for anything useful. He found a fallen pole about 8 feet long, roughly 2.5 meters. It was weathered but still strong enough for what he had in mind. Going back into that darkness was even worse. He had to move quickly but quietly, carrying the long pole through the narrow passage. The snake's hissing grew louder as he got closer to where his friends waited. Working entirely by feel, he positioned the pole above the snake's body. The creature sensed the threat and started thrashing, trying to escape. But the same narrow walls that trapped the humans also trapped the snake. With the pole holding the snake down, they pressed themselves against the far wall, feeling the creature struggling just inches away. The snake's anger was intense, a constant hissing that echoed through the passage. Now, Hardcastle faced the most dangerous moment. He had to release the snake and get away before it could turn on him. In one quick motion, he lifted the branch and ran. The snake's fury followed them through the darkness. They stumbled and ran through the narrow passage, guided by memory and adrenaline. Behind them, the creature's hissing echoed off the walls like an angry steam engine. They didn't stop until they reached the main tunnel and its blessed natural light. Only then did they allow themselves to collapse, hearts still pounding from what they had just survived. January 4th, 1989. 3 cave explorers learned that even the most routine trip can turn deadly in seconds. They went in with basic equipment for a quick look around. They came out with a story that would stay with them forever. The cave is still there near Tequila Volcano. Its 75 entrances still let in the light. And somewhere in its dark depths, that 6-foot guardian probably still patrols its territory, waiting for the next person to wander too close.